Hi. Before going to video, please subscribe to my channel for more interesting stuff. Story from r/no sleep. Episode 4. Posted by u/Carl1961. I'm an actress on the set of a low-budget slasher film. I think they're really killing off my co-stars. Part 1. You can call me Cassie. That's not my real name, but it's close enough. I'm 19 years old, and while not exactly supermodel material, I have been told I'm quite attractive. I moved to LA 18 months ago after graduating high school, the first in my family to do so, to follow my lifelong dream of becoming an actress. I can't say I regret the move, at least not before everything that happened, anyway. My home life was, let's say, not an ideal situation. I grew up in a shithole redneck town you never heard of in southern Missouri. My mom and stepdad aren't exactly the most supportive parents in the world. They aren't exactly the greatest, either. To put it bluntly, I guess you can say they're trailer trash. No, they were never physically abusive to me. No, my stepdad didn't molest me, and while they did both work low-paying jobs full-time in order to pay the bills and did feed and clothe me, there was still a lot of ugliness in the house. Both of them have a problem with alcohol, and when they get drunk they can get mean, not to me but to each other. The police have been called out more than once because of the wild fights they've had, fights of the dish-throwing, name-calling, shouting at the top of their lungs variety. I think they were probably featured on the show Cops at least once, but I was too embarrassed to check. Anyway, when I told them of my plan to move to California, they both sneered and told me I was wasting my time and that I didn't have a chance in hell, and that I was probably going to wind up a stripper or a porn star and develop a drug problem. Thanks, Mom and Dad. Needless to say, I didn't listen to them. I had to get out of there. And I didn't really have that many options. I wasn't good enough in school to score a college scholarship, and my folks sure as hell couldn't afford to pay tuition. Plus, the career selection in my hometown is pretty limited, so my choices basically amounted to working a dead-end job as a Walmart cashier, or a shampoo girl at a beauty parlor, or a waitress at our local truck stop. Obviously, I wasn't thrilled with any of those prospects, so I decided to throw caution to the wind and take a chance. I took the money I'd been saving up for the past few years babysitting the younger kids in the trailer park, plus the $200 my grandmother gave me as a graduation gift, bought a ticket on a Greyhound and headed west out to sunny SoCal to pursue my dream. I'll spare you the details of when I first arrived, my fish out of water, country girl in the big city for the first time, in awe of the sights and sounds story. I'll just say Los Angeles was light years away from my life back in Missouri and leave it at that. It took some time for me to adjust to things out here. I stayed at a cheap motel for a few days until I found a job working as a server in a rather trendy upscale restaurant downtown. Pretty cliched, right? And eventually I managed to save up enough to move into a small apartment I share with a roommate. After establishing both a career and a residence, my next order of business was finding an agent, which was no easy task. After all, thousands of naive, hopeful, starry-eyed young people with the same bright idea I had arrive in LA every day looking for the same thing, so the market is pretty saturated. Also, as I found out the hard way, it's almost impossible to land an agent without a SAG card, and you can't get a SAG card without an agent. Sounds crazy, right? But I wasn't ready to give up. It took me over 2 months before I finally met Maury, who took pity on me and agreed to represent me. He's been my agent ever since. Well, he was until recently, anyway. Maury worked for one of the lower-tier agencies, the ones that can never hope to stack up against the big boys, catering to lesser-known and up-and-coming actresses/actors who've maybe had a bit part role on an episode of NCIS or a one-shot appearance on a daytime soap opera or a lead role in some obscure direct-to-DVD horror flick maybe 10 people will ever see. Still, I was thrilled just to find an agent, any agent who was willing to give me a chance. I tried to be realistic with my expectations. I knew I wasn't going to be setting the world on fire overnight or be playing Leonardo DiCaprio's love interest next week. It was going to take some time for me to get noticed, and in the meantime, I would have to pay my dues, as the expression goes in the business. And that's exactly what happened. The first job Maury secured for me was a 2-line 1-scene part in an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, that NBC sitcom starring Andy Samberg. Surprisingly, most of the TV shows set in New York are actually filmed in Hollywood, which I didn't know. I played a pizza delivery girl who brings a pizza to the precinct building. Not much to brag about, I guess, and the pay wasn't great, union scale for a walk-on part, and unfortunately, my role was shot second unit, so I didn't get to meet any of the stars. Basically, They filmed a point-of-view shot of me standing in a doorway speaking to a camera, with insert shots of Andre Braugher, who plays Andy Samberg's captain, opening the door, taking the pizza and closing the door added later, but I was still excited to finally have established myself as a bona fide Hollywood star with my first screen credit I could put in my resume and on my IMDb page, which I set up myself online that very night, for the whole world to see. I guess I let it go to my head a little. I became convinced that small, negligible part in a sitcom was going to be the key that would open the door to stardom for me, and that greater things would soon be coming my way. Well, things didn't work out that way. It was almost a month before Maury got another part for me. I played an aimless girl in a bikini at a pool party in a Dwayne Johnson action comedy with a single line of dialogue, basically, a glorified extra, in a scene that ultimately got cut from the finished film. I guess I felt a little disheartened. Maury told me not to get discouraged and gave me the standard agent-to-client pep talk telling me these things take a while and I needed to hang in there and that eventually I was going to break through. I tried to believe him, tried to stay optimistic, but as it turned out, that single blink and you'll miss it one scene appearance in Brooklyn Nine-Nine is probably the most high-profile role I'll ever have. After my brief part in the Dwayne Johnson movie got cut, the best Maury could do for me was some commercial work here and there. You may have caught a glimpse of me in one of the Fresh Bet dog food commercials or playing the girlfriend in a Gillette ad. The pay was actually a little better than what I had made working on the Samberg sitcom, and with the money I was earning waiting tables I was scraping by, just barely. Things looked promising when Maury managed to set up an interview for me with a pretty well-known film producer who was looking for a young newcomer to play the romantic lead in Michael Bay's latest sci-fi action epic. I should have seen the red flags when I went to meet him at his office in Studio City and he offered me champagne, which I politely declined, still being underage, and 2, invited me to sit beside him on the large leather couch in his office. He explained to me oh so subtly that in this business, young actresses and actors had to be prepared to make concessions and discover certain things about themselves in order to get ahead in the industry and that a certain quid pro quo was expected from them in order to further their careers. I'll admit, I was still a bit naive and didn't really catch his drift until he placed his hand on my thigh. At which point I took the champagne flute he had offered me and poured it over his head before swiftly exiting his office. I heard recently that in the wake of the Me Too movement this producer was outed as having made unwanted sexual advances to dozens of hopeful young starlets, and more than a few young male actors, too. A year had gone by and Maury's phone calls had grown increasingly infrequent. I was starting to lose hope, starting to think, God help me. My parents had been right and maybe I should admit defeat and take the next bus back home to Missouri with my tail between my legs. Then, 4 months ago, out of the blue, Maury called me while I was working my shift at the restaurant. I excused myself to answer my phone in the restroom. Cassie, I got some good news for you. He began. Maury explained that a well-known independent film producer had taken an interest in me and was looking to cast me in a low-budget horror film he was financing. After the last time, I was leery about meeting this guy, but Maury promised me this man had a solid reputation and was known for being professional. Still apprehensive, I agreed to meet him at his office in downtown Los Angeles. The producer, Ray, was a slim, fit, good-looking man in his mid-50s with a healthy tan from playing a lot of golf or tennis. He had a friendly smile and the handsome, slightly rugged features of the older lead in a soap opera or the sitcom dad you always had a crush on. He shook my hand and I handed him my all-too-thin resume and sat down in front of his desk. He asked me a lot of questions about myself, where I was from, what my goals were, who my friends were. Some of the questions he asked me I found a little peculiar, such as if I had any relatives or close friends back home who would miss me. Maybe that should have rung a warning bell, but I was too caught up in the moment, too excited about the opportunity I had been given, too determined to not let it slip by to really pay much attention at the time. Ray explained to me that the film he was producing was slightly different than most horror films. He was aiming to capture a new feel, something he described as superrealism that would give the film a genuine sense of being authentic. He handed me a copy of the screenplay, which I glanced over. The title struck me as odd. It was simply called Video Number 31172, and didn't credit a writer. Ray explained it would make sense in context. He invited me to stay and read the screenplay in its entirety, which I did. Honestly, I wasn't too impressed. It was pretty basic teen slasher stuff. A bunch of dumb college kids break into a deserted ski resort in the mountains to drink, do drugs, screw around and in general have a wild good time, and are summarily picked off one by a mysterious masked killer. I didn't think it was all that innovative or creative. In fact, I think I had seen a movie with almost the same exact plot on cable just a few years back. But I wasn't about to voice my opinion to the man who might potentially be offering me my first big break in the business. One thing that did surprise me was that my character's name, highlighted in yellow, was my real name, Cassie. Ray explained that all of the characters' names were the same as the first names of the actors portraying them. He said it was to add to the sense of abject realism he was going for. He told me the film was going to be a found footage movie with all of the action captured on the teens' phone cameras as well as the surveillance cameras throughout the resort. I simply nodded and pretended to be impressed, when I was secretly anything but. Found footage films were anything but new. Blair Witch Project instantly came to mind. Ray told me that the other 5 leads had already been cast and he was just looking for one more fresh face to put in the role of the female protagonist. He looked at me expectantly, waiting for my response. I had some misgivings about the project, not the least of which was that I found the material to be hacky and substandard, but also, I felt somewhat uneasy about all of this, maybe even a little scared. Something seemed off about this whole thing, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. But I was desperate to prove myself as an actress, and I was aware this might be my last shot at getting my foot in the door, so I swallowed my reservations and agreed. Ray looked pleased. He then told me something that surprised me. Before he could sign me to the film, I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement promising not to divulge any details of the production to anyone, including friends, and I would have to turn over my phone and any communication devices as soon as we arrived at the filming location, a ski resort closed for renovations in the mountains about a 5-hour drive north of LA where we would be shooting for 4 to 6 weeks. I asked why, and he told me it was help heighten the tension and sense of isolation and suspense our characters would be experiencing, and to prevent any unnecessary interruptions that could disrupt our performances. He told me when I arrived, I would be given a different phone to use in character that could record video but would not have any line of direct communication to the outside world. Again, I should have known that something was off about all this and just said no. I think I was even about to do just that, when Ray, seeing my expression and maybe sensing I was about to object, got down to brass taxes and told me how much I would be paid. $100,000. I was stunned. It was a lot more than I had been expecting. A lot more than I could hope to earn shooting commercials and taking food orders from rude, arrogant, entitled film producers and studio executives who tipped $5 on a $700 bill. With that money I could finally afford to move to a better place than the rundown apartment I shared with a bitchy roommate I didn't get along with and who, an aspiring actress herself, was openly jealous and resentful of what paltry amount of success I had had. I could also finally buy a car for myself and not be stuck relying on public transportation, which is notoriously hard to find in Los Angeles, and rides from coworkers and what few friends I had made since arriving in town over a year ago. I should have asked more questions. I should have asked why he was offering to pay such a huge amount to a nobody like me to star in a film that the critics would trash and would probably flop and be forgotten in a few months' time. But in that moment all I could see were dollar signs. So against my better judgment, I agreed. He took a legal-looking document out of his desk drawer and placed it before me with a gold pen, and I immediately signed my name on the dotted line. And oh God, knowing now what I didn't know then, I wish I hadn't. I wish I hadn't. Thanks for watching. Please do like, share, comment and subscribe for more videos.